Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We are being recorded and carried on Mikey Live, audio and video. If you do not wish to be covered, find a seat behind a pillar. Your Excellency, Ambassador Jorge Guerrero de Venezuela, the distinguished members of the professional academic community of Grenada, Dr. Damian Greaves, Professor of Sociology at St. George's University, Professor Curtis Jacob, author, specialist in Julien Fedon Matters, other Dr. Reginald Buckmeyer, popular Grenville-based academic and analyst, all other academic and teachers, members of the Grenada and Grenville community of Grenada, Toastmasters, I see many here, and most importantly, children. And last but certainly not least, our distinguished guest, Mr. Herman Hall. It is a real delight to have this session here in Grenville to welcome author, Fedon connoisseur, Grenadian patriot, and touring publicist, for 50 years or more, author of the internationally acclaimed magazine Everybody's. We're welcoming him in all those capacities, and certainly in his capacity as author. Before I proceed, we pray. And we pray here this afternoon with a salute to our God as contained in the national anthem. Stand for the national anthem, please, which is our prayer. Thank you. Be seated. We've just been led in national prayer, ever conscious of God, by the Kenrick Harper Junior Boys Choir. Give them a round of applause. Choir, orchestra. Orchestra. Great. So, again, welcome and thank you for joining us. As I've already said, we have with us this much anticipated author, Grenadian by heritage, by birth, and returning frequently to the land of his birth from his perch in the United States. Just one or two housekeeping matters before we proceed. I already indicated that we are being carried live. I'd also like to tell you that there are magazines, Everybody magazines, which is a real treasure, complimentary copies of the magazine and pens at the back table for you, so don't leave without having one. And there are refreshments that will be available to you, hopefully as soon as our formal session is finished. And there's water. If you are inclined to, to use a restroom, there is one to your right down this hallway, and there's another one to your left outside on that walkway. Good. I neglected to mention a very special participant this afternoon who has climbed every mountain in Grenada, and certainly Fedor's Hill and Fedor's Camp and Fedor's everything to do with climbing and Fedor. And I want to ask you to give him a special round of applause. Telfa Bido. Telfa Bido, who comes from one of the villages very famous in the Fedon story. Now, who was Julien Fedon? Why is he important to all of us, to scholars worldwide? We are going to agree and disagree on that conversation this afternoon. It's really very exciting. And to get us started, I want to, I'll tell you now, this is not going to be a conventional presentation, then Q&A, then we're going to meander our way through the afternoon for more learning and more enjoyment. And I want to remind you that the author said to me that he is not going to read from the book. You buy your book, he will autograph it, and you will read from the book. So those of you like me who have been struggling to finish it, which I did not before he arrived, you might still find a favorite passage there that you might want to ask him about. So to get us started, I want to ask him two questions. The first one, may I call you Herman, my old friend? Herman, is come to the podium and tell us what motivated you to write this book. Why did you write it? So Herman Hall, everybody. And this is his second book. We'll get to that shortly.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ambassador Williams. Dr. Williams, you know, she wears many caps, and proud to say that she was Grenada's ambassador on 2 occasions. We don't know if there will be a third. I hope you got the joke, you know. So 2, after 2 comes 3, right? But before I answer the question, I just, as a Grenadian, and I'm always in Grenada frequently, except COVID times, I just want to congratulate everyone in Grenada about the election. It brought, I was so pleased to see, not necessarily, I'm not talking about who won or who lost, but to the people of Grenada for that willingness they displayed on both party sides to make sure that the vote counted. So I think Grenadians abroad, I know, was following it. I was in London on Memorial Weekend in the United States, which is the end of May. I was in London to launch the book. And at the book launch, there were people talking about the Grenada elections, Grenadians, and some on one side, on the other was favoring other parties. But at the end of the day, the people voted. We have a new government, and it is, I'm not here to say I'm supporting or not supporting. My gratitude and thanks is to the people of Grenada, because as a journalist in 1979, 1983 period, I covered it, especially in 1983 when I was a consultant both to ABC and CBS on what was happening in Grenada in October of 1983. I was both in Trinidad, Barbados, and so forth, knowing what was going on, and to know how Grenada came, what happened, and to see we have a new Grenada today, and the future of Grenada is in the hands of the young people, people like me and people of my age, should just lay it back. If they could give an advice, they give. But the future looks very, very great. And I was in a department store in Brooklyn while the result was given. And the only access basically I could have get in that department store was Mikey Live. And the result was not, it was just coming in, no seats were yet declared. But there was such enthusiasm abroad and here. So I think everyone, regardless of party, should be very, very proud. And I couldn't say any time better that Grenada has a very, very bright future. And I'm happy to be a Grenadian. Now to the question. The question is, what motivated me? The truth about the answer, there are many, many reasons, but the simple answer is this. I had no idea what was motivation, but I could say I was motivated since I was about 3 or 4 or 5 years old. You see, I was born on Belvedere Estate, the alleged estate owned by Julien Fedon. And I was born in 45. But by 1950-51, I was hearing the name Julien Fedon, my early memories. And I thought the man had just passed. It's mentioned in my first book. And the laborers of Belvedere Estate, they always spoke of Julien Fedon. And in 1951, I was 6 years old. And there was a man named Mr. Simon. He was a driver coming back from slavery, so he was a driver in Belvedere Estate. And he was saying Gary was a reincarnation of Julien Fedon. So that was in 1951. And I always heard of Julien Fedon. And then I was fortunate to be one, perhaps of the only youngster on Belvedere Estate who had the fortune to get a secondary school education at the GBSS. So the laborers, a laborer named Mr. Lehman Brown, all these people have departed this world. He challenged me when I was maybe 14, 15. He said, when you grow up, I want you to write a book on Julien Fedon. So in terms of the motivation, I gave only 2 reasons. There are many more, so I hope I answered the question, Madam Ambassador.
Well, Herman, thank you very much. You got us thinking how important it is to have early passion and early motivation and expectation from older persons towards younger persons, because somebody knew you could do it and that you would do it. And so that's an important lesson for us. We have young people in the audience here, and we must always continue to motivate and to raise our expectations of young people. I remember a Grenadian, Kenrick Lewis from your village, Dr. Lewis from his village, a well-renowned scientist in Grenada. His cousin is here. Speed, I can't remember. What is your first name? Lewis. And he tells a story, Dr. Kenrick Lewis told me the story that, you know, here he was, a young migrant to the United States, and he had a daughter in school, and she was doing relatively well in math. She had made an 86 in math, and the teacher called him in and was really excited about this score. And he said he was so upset. And he said to the teacher, "Why are you so excited about 86 when the top score is 100? What's keeping you from expecting my child to do 100 in math?" And this is the ethos, this is the spirit of West Indians, you know. So your early mentors obviously did a great job. Which brings me to my second question, and that is, what do you anticipate or what do you want to be the impact of the book?
That's a very excellent question. Now, most people write to earn money from books, and about 90% of the people who write with that expectation don't make a dime. It's only celebrities basically who make books, especially 18th century books don't make too much, you don't make anything out of it. So it was not about writing to make $1. I will be shocked if I ever make $1 out of this book. Hopefully, yes. But maybe the main reason is that I would love to depart the little knowledge I have before I depart this world to the next generation. Because I keep talking about the illiterate people of Belvedere. This is 1951. This is the 1930s, the 40s. 90% of the people on estates couldn't read and write. The only person who could have read and write on that estate was the man who adopted me. And the estate overseer, a man named Brisbane Callis from Munich, and the estate manager, Mr. Ethelbert Monroe, from Plains, Sotes, in that area. So I was just had to write something because history in Grenada, I don't want to sound negative, to me, over the last years, regardless of what government is in power, history has not been, I would say, as a major priority. I think, I mean, in the United States, in New York, where I'm based, I really deal, I live the Caribbean life every day. When I went to New York, my ambition was to return to Grenada 4 years later and hopefully enter politics. That was in 1967. Well, I'm sure you did not need another politician in Grenada. But I decided to dedicate myself into the Caribbean American community. So I just don't deal with the Grenada community. As a matter of fact, traveling with me is one of Everybody's Magazine premier photographers. He is the photographer, Mr. Leonard Mackenzie. He's right here. Take a bow. Give him a round of applause. He is a photojournalist for the Jamaica Gleaner, for the Jamaica Star, and Booth Stewart, the late Booth Stewart newspaper. So we deal overall with the Caribbean community. And what I know is this: when you speak to a lot of nationals from other islands, most of them know their history. But few Grenadians know their history. And I will give you two cases in point. In 2016, when the very first book came out, Belvedere Estate, Fedon's House, there is a company named Dennis Shipping in Brooklyn, a Jamaican owns it. It is a big company. Some Grenadians ship through Dennis too. And he was so proud of the book, and one of his managers was a Grenadian. And he thought he would buy the book. He bought 2 books and give this Grenadian manager the book as a gift. And he had already read the book, and the Grenadian manager, he disappointed him. He was shocked. The Grenadian manager had no idea of where was Fedo's camp, where was Belvedere, of any person named Julien Fedo. And then there's another, a prominent restaurant in Queens. It's about the leading Caribbean restaurants where superstars go eat and so forth. And one of the chefs there was a Grenadian. And he too, the owner of the restaurant, also was so proud that he will give this chef the 2016 book. And again, that person had no idea of little history about Grenada. And also, a lot of people, when you tell them about the rich history of Julien Fedo, we have to remember that the rebellion or the revolution, and Dr. Curtis Jacobs is here, I know you prefer to use the word revolution. I use the word revolution. Sometimes I use the word rebellion in different contexts. But this was the longest rebellion in the British Caribbean in the 18th century. It lasted for 16 months. No other revolution lasted that long. I'm talking about the British Caribbean or British West Indies in the 18th century. Simple as that, none. And it took the British 16 months, over 30,000 soldiers and Marines from Europe to end the Fedo's rebellion. And not only that, we hear today of mercenaries. We hear of Palestinian mercenaries. Mercenaries were always there. So back, what happened in 1796? The British government enlisted German and Dutch mercenaries to join them. As a matter of fact, the actual conqueror of Fedo's camp, what we call Fedo's camp, or what we may say Monquaqua. The leader of it, who actually climbed it, was the Dutch and German commandos. It was not even the British. But so people always ask me, especially the Jamaican market, where I'm very big in, since I do the Oliver Samuel plays and they are Everybody's Magazine premier subscribers. They always ask, if you have such great history, they all know about the 1979, sorry. Everybody knows that. But you have such rich history. And how come they don't know about it? So this is one of the reasons. So I don't care about whether we make $1 from the sale of the book, as long as this book is read by the young people so that they can know our history. Because if we do not know our history, we really don't have much of a future. There's a lot of quotations about it, a lot of people who don't know the past, will not understand the present, and then the future will be very difficult. So understanding and knowing our history. While we were coming here in the vehicle, Pastor Christopher, we came through the St. David's area, and he was explaining to the photographer, Mackenzie from Jamaica, about Calvini and Lassages, and every name he mentioned, I said, is all tied in with the Federalist Rebellion. Lassages, when you read one of the chapters, the distance, the night it took them to travel from the Fort Frederick, or then, to Lassages took all night in order to conquer or try to defeat Fedo right here in Soubise, in Granville, in Grenville, which was not in Grenville, you know, and so forth. So these are some of the reasons I would love to see the young people read it and understand the history. But I deliberately left certain questions that I couldn't answer for another generation of researchers, because as technology developed, there's a lot of information about the Federalist Rebellion right here in Grenada, at the Grenada Registrar's Office, written in 18th century, 17th century French. It's decaying now. So another group of researchers hopefully will answer. And I tried also not to make some authors, especially in the scholarly world, they make assumptions. So for example, if you ask me, where was Julien Fedon born? I will tell you, in this book, I do not know. The assumption that Julien Fedon was born in Victoria Guelph, we don't know. Show me his birth certificate. Show me some sort of certificate. Was he born in Martinique? We don't know neither. Show me his birth certificate, except new researchers are coming up. I also offer another idea. St. Lucia, some of those other islands at that time was French. There was the possibility he could have been born on one of those islands. So I try not to make assumptions, but hopefully to challenge tomorrow's researchers to come up with the answers that I couldn't find.
Thank you. Very good. So the impact he wants is that we know our history. I want to read a little bit in regard to that. On page 127, the author says, little is known about Julien Fedon's activities in the early weeks of the rebellion, or even its entire 16-month duration. Detailed witnesses' accounts by Gordon Turnbull, Reverend Francis Mahon, Henry Thornhill, Dr. John Hay, and Thomas Turner Wise, plus reports in letters and memos about Fedon, were all written by Britishers and were, as a result, most certainly biased. The writings were, and I quote, distressing scenes of murder, raping, and devastation. End of quote. The principal objective of Julien Fedon and his revolutionaries, however, was their demand that the British government surrender the colony to them. It is unknown whether Fedon intended to make Grenada a French colony or whether he planned to declare it an independent nation, such as the 13 British colonies in North America had done 2 decades prior. Further, there is no evidence that Fedon sought to become governor or president of Grenada. And I think in the first passage, the clarity that it was written by Britishers threw my mind to what has happened with the Grenada Revolution. It was all written by North Americans in the wave of its collapse. And then the intentions of Fedon, is remained a major academic and intellectual debate, to which I'd like to go as soon as we get our next rendition from the boys' orchestra. And while they are coming on to perform for us, I want to ask you to think about your favorite question, your favorite philosophical, political, or historical debate about Julien Fedon. When you became aware of the Fedon's role in our society, what did you learn? What did you think? And has that held up over time? Has it held up over time? Because there are issues of political objective, of race, of his relation, a lot of work in relation to l'Abbé, I could tell you that I largely found out about Fedon in university and formed my own set of analyses and facts about him. And we will return to that in a minute after we have this second performance. Dime? Harper's Music School is about to present his pupils. Go for it. Thank you, Harper's Music School. And, you know, we're blessed to have these young musicians arising. And we also didn't know, I bet you didn't know that the teacher, Kenrick Harper, is related to the author, cousins. And you didn't say, but I read the book thinking you were somehow related to a whole number of actors, including Fedor, up there, you know, in Guam, Victoria, Belvedere. And all that comes right back to our celebrity here, Mr. Bideau, Telfer Bideau. So it's a family affair this afternoon. And we are all one big Grenadian family. And my last question before I open it up to you is, in the Fedon story, whatever version we are holding on to, he was a hero, he was a bad guy, he wanted to free Grenada, he wanted to return Grenada to French control, you know, on and on. There's so many dimensions to it. In your version of Fedon, what you have edited since you've started to read new material, and this question might have particular impact for at least the two Fedon specialists in the audience that I know, Dr. Curtis Jacob, who has did his dissertation on the subject, and His Excellency, who is climbed Belvedere and researching and quickly writing in English. You're writing in Spanish, the version of, he's writing a book on Fedor, the ambassador of Venezuela has come to Grenada to write a book, and he's writing a book on Fedor. So the two of you might be thinking about this question. And here is a question finally. Who needs redemption in the Fedor story? Who needs redemption? Especially, last caveat, against the movement now, the call for reparations. Yeah. Who needs redemption? Takers? Floor is open. Curtis, your mouth is half open already. Come to the podium.
I feel myself in 2022 in a rather strange place. I said it's strange because in this year, two writers have taken some inspiration from my academic work. This year is 21 years since I was awarded a PhD in history on Fedon's Rebellion. And earlier this year, Christopher D. Riggs did a play called Julien Fedon. And now Herman has published his book on the same subject. My involvement or my acquaintance with Julien Fedon is not quite as dramatic as Herman's. I only came seriously to understand Fedon's Rebellion in 1992. And of all places, I am in the headquarters of OWTU in Trinidad. I'm Trinidadian. And I met George Louison. So at the time I was writing a book about another Grenadian who actually used to live in Soubise and who actually took the boat, the Lady Kelvin, from Guave in 1941 and went to Trinidad, and in 10 years he became the leader of the public campaign to abolish or to repeal the Shouters Prohibition Ordinance in Trinidad in 1917. That chap's name is Elton George Griffith, and it became the subject of my first monograph, which is Joy Comes in the Morning. It came out on the same day that the Shouters Prohibition Liberation Day became a public holiday in 1996. But I'm asking George Louison about this Soubise and He says, so what you doing? I said, I'm doing this book on a chap from Grenada who went to Trinidad. He said, but we looking for somebody to do a popular history of Fedon's rebellion. So I said, who? He said, Fedon. And deep out of my memory, just about 10 years before, I remember Paul Keynes Douglas did this piece called Fedon's Flute. So that was a Saturday afternoon, like now. And I was working at the University of West Indies at the St. Augustine campus. And the Monday, I found myself in the UWE's main library at St. Augustine. And I have been digging up ever since. And when I was ready to go back to, never forget that day, the 19th of December, 1995, I am ready to go back to postgraduate studies at the university. And I had another topic in mind, and a little voice behind me said, put in Fedon's rebellion. And that's why I'm standing here today. Because I didn't know how my life would change after December of 1995, but by 1996 I was no longer living in Trinidad, and I ended up completing my postgraduate work in history in 2001. So I did not know there was anybody named Herman Hall about this business. And when I started to publish pieces, people started getting in contact with you also. So Herbert came into my office a day at Marisho House, and we talked for several hours. And much of I started to give him a lot of stuff because, particularly after 2014, I began to write a lot, having nothing else to do, and it is really pleasing to see how people have taken or made use of the work which I did in University of West Indies. One little more anecdote. About 4 years ago, I received this telephone call in Grenada. And he said, I'm looking for Dr. Curtis Jacobs. I said, this is he. He says, I'm your friend, Christopher Barrow from Trinidad. I had not seen Christopher since 1983. And before that, I had not seen him since 1967. Only to find out that Christopher's ancestor, a chap called Salandi, was executed at Market Square, and his head and he was decapitated in Market Square sometime in July of 1796. His ancestor was Grenadian, and I knew Christopher since 1965, 1966, and I never knew that until he did that, until he told me that. So I sent him all this stuff, until I sent him the picture of the 1781 lithograph of Market Square in St. George. As I said, you see that place there where the gallows is? That is where your ancestors' blood was shed in 1996. So he began to memorize the Act of Attainder, one of the most important documents that he ever, in the history of Grenada. That is where the British, not being able to put down Fedon's rebellion, decided on doing what is called judgment by legislation. So they passed this law, naming everybody, including Julien Fedon's, they were attainted with high treason. And that became the basis upon which people would be caught and executed if you did not submit yourself to justice by September 1 of 1796 and 1795. And it's because of that I could have told Chris, look, this is your ancestor's name. So he saw his ancestor's name on the thing. I didn't know I knew Chris in 1967. We were friends together in primary school, and I didn't know that he had Grenadian roots. And it's a big thing in the family now that they are be able to deal with all this stuff. Apart from that, too, is that it's only when you began to live in Grenada on studying Fedon when you began to know how many Trinidadians are in fact Grenadians. And the people who you met in secondary school in particular, they began to have names which you see in the Act of Attainder and so on in particular. People who you know personally, you didn't know they were descended from Grenadians who went or who fled to Trinidad to avoid prosecution and so on. So I want to congratulate Herman for this work. I haven't seen it yet. I've seen parts of it in draft because he usually would let a lot of stuff pass me. I remember when he was doing the first book, and he told me some critic or some publisher told him that is not looking good or something like that. I say, you remember that woman? I say, write what you want. Don't worry with them. And it comes out into a type of book which I didn't even know existed. A coming of age book. I never heard about that. I said, man, write it how you want. Don't worry with them. And it becomes I didn't know there was such a type of book existing in the literary world, a coming of age book. And I want to congratulate him again on what he has done. There is still a lot of work to be done. We still have not yet found out. Oh, one more thing. A couple more things. One, just a little while. One, we think now that Julien Fedon was born in Grenada, in St. Mark's. We are fairly certain about that. We're also fairly certain that his parents, his father was a white Pierre Fedon he left the port of Bordeaux in France. We know that. His mother was Martinican, free black woman. That is fairly certain. We are somewhat fairly certain that he died in Cuba sometime after 1796, or perhaps 1814. We're fairly certain. And part of it is a disappointment to me that in the 1783 period, the documents you have read, that the Grenadians did not quite appreciate or know that Cuba was the haven for Julien Fedon after Fedon's rebellion, and the Grenadians never made a big thing about it. And it's something that perhaps it strengthens that relationship between Grenada and Cuba in a way that we probably don't quite understand. I could say a lot more, but
Thank you very much.
thanks.
Thank you very much. This is what happened when we all meet to exchange notes. So do we have our thoughts around who needs redemption? Should you answer it some more, or should we call for some comments from our author? Come please, we came to hear you.
Thank you. Well, first of all, when I heard Redemption song, the group, the band playing Redemption song, obviously this is Bob Marley's tune, and it brought back memories at the funeral of Bob, because I did several interviews with Bob between 1977 until his passing. As a matter of fact, in one of the interviews, Bob told me he had cancer of the toe, but he thought it was just nonsense, and it turned out he did have cancer. So I knew Bob, Rita, very, very well. And at the funeral in 9 Mile, for, as we say in Grenada, a split second, I thought I was in Belvedere. Because 9 Mile in those days, now it is an international tourist attraction, the resting place of Bob Marley. But back in 1981, 9 Mile think of some remote place in Grenada where only one vehicle go and nothing could pass. This was 9 Mile. And for a split second, as the sun was setting, I thought I was in Belvedere looking at Fedo's camp at the setting sun. And I mentioned that in the first book, Belvedere State Fedon's House, because it meant so much when I, at 9 Mile, that particular time. There were a couple notes I wanted to, points to make, without any exaggerating. When we achieved statehood, remember in coming of independence in the British colonies, it was over the centuries, it was various constitutional changes and so forth, gradual. But youngsters like me, when we got statehood in 1967, we knew the next step would be independence. So when Grenada got statehood in February or March of 1966 or 67, fortunately for me, I thought we should remember the occasion with a history of Grenada. And there was a newspaper called The West Indian, written by he was the editor, Mr. Klein. So back in 1967, on the attainment of Grenada becoming an associated state and statehood, I wrote the history about Julien Fedon, and that was my first article, way back in 1967. And then a few years later, or just before that, I was fortunate when I left the GBSS to get a job at the St. John's Christian Secondary School, where I was the first local teacher. Pastor Antoine became the second local teacher, but some of you will able to relate, even the viewers who are looking at the show right now, that recently, I think it was early this year or late last year, his wife passed, and I think there was a big funeral for her at Queen's Park. Rosella Antoine, right? Sandy, her, right. She was, I taught at the St. John's Christian Secondary School, and but what I was saying is that it's people like Ursula Sandy, the shapers. So in 1965, we wanted to be recognized as a bona fide secondary school. It was old-time Grenada, the two bona fide religion at that point, the established church, the Anglican, the Roman Catholic, and so was the secondary school. Anglican High School, Convent, GBSS, and Presentation College. So we wanted to show the government of Grenada that we could get some funding. So when the shapers asked, even though we had no graduates, what could we do at the end of August or Christmas for speech night? I said, well, why don't we do Chaucer or Shakespeare? And Mrs. Shaper, the American co-founder of the school, she said, Mr. Hall, I am very ashamed of you. I'm embarrassed. You have such rich history. You know so much about Julien Fedon. Why are you thinking that way? Why don't you write a play for speech night? No, I never had no idea how to write a play, except when I went to the GBSS sometime, I tried to act in plays at speech night. That was about it. So I wrote the play, and I was young and radical at that time to a certain extent, and I had him as a big hero. And she said, no, this man is considered a criminal by Grenadians. So we had some argument, and I was then young, and then we sort of neutralized, and then the play was called A Day in West Indian History. So the actual play about Julien Fedon was actually held at the St. John's Christian Secondary School. There was someone a while ago who came to me and she told me that I taught her mother or father at that school. So I've been around with Julien Fedon a long time. Now, coming off what Professor Curtis Jacobs was speaking about, I am not a scholar. I try to write the book in a non-scholarly way. First of all, I cannot write as a scholar to begin with. And so I was a little bit embarrassed in London when one of the persons said to me that this book is very scholarly, and that's just the opposite of what I wanted. I want a book that anyone could read. And understand. And this is why the very first book, Belvedere Estate Fedon's House, is still selling 4 or 5 years later. It is always selling. I always get demand for it because it is very humorous. It was written for what we call a grassroots audience. And I try to give the understanding of what the laborers, again, the illiterate laborers were saying, oral stories, and prove, through documentation that it was. But as what Professor Jacobs said, I think it was the London Times or the Guardian in London, who covered that book signing in 2016. They said it was like an autobiography of myself, but it was done in such a way to link boyhood days growing up on the estate with all the various areas of the estate, because I have climbed Fedo's camp, I will say no less than 100 times. I was going to Fedo's camp, I used to cry. I'm not kidding. In those days, the national pastime in Grenada was mountain climbing, during Easter. And they will come to Belvedere, and the adults will be going, and about 5, 6 years old, I'm crying, I want to go to, especially in the dry season. So by 10 years old, I was climbing Mount Fedo's camp. And when the tongue folks, the folks from St. George's, come up at Easter time, little boys barefoot, that's me, they give you a little candy, and you run up, you bring them up to Fedo's camp, they come back down, and by 2 o'clock there is another group, they offer me a little piece of cake, I run up to Fedo's camp, and so my last trip to Fedo's camp was 2017. Brother John is here. Yeah, you could take a stand as, you could take a bow, Brother John. He was here, and his son, Kenrick, the musician. Where is Kenrick? They accompanied me to Fedo's camp in 2017. Yeah, it was 2017. And it was my worst trip to Fedo's camp. It rained all day. At the time I said we could as well sleep up there because we get injured in coming back down. And then I was saying humorously, which was edited from the book, I was saying, forgive me, Father Divas, and forgive me for Father Bernard for laughing at you. Because I used to go to Fedo's camp with Father Bernard and Father Divas as a youngster, but we little boys will go ahead and they force him to climb, and that was happening with me, especially I had a little sneakers in 2017. I was falling, it was one. And now that we are speaking about Father Divas, I want you to officially say the very first book was dedicated to the laborers of Belvedere Estate and to my aunt who couldn't read it, and her husband the person who could have read it. But this second book is dedicated to Telfer Bido, my cousin. I used to go, Telfer is from Subi, so when I was 5, 6 years old, I used to go to my great-grandmother. I had no idea if she was my great-grandmother, and that was Telfer's grandmother. Now, Telfer always loved sailing and painting, and little boys walking behind Telfer and his friends to go in areas of Subis. And even when we went swimming, he didn't want me to come with him. And many times I'm trying to go between the 2 rocks, between Markley and Subis Rock, and they will leave me in that deep ocean over there in the sea. But it's so, I never thought Telfer would have been a mountain climber. I knew him to be painting and sailing and so forth. And now he's renowned. So whenever Telfer Bido is renowned around the world, if you Google Telfer Bido, you will see all sorts of videos, audios, everything about him that he has taken people. As a matter of fact, the governor, Ninian Home, one of his great-granduncle nephews, Telfer brought him one time up there a couple of years back. And then the book, as I said, is also dedicated to Father Bernard, so Father Divas. Father Divas came to Grenada. He was born, I think, in 1885, around that time, from England. And he fell in love with Grenada as a Roman Catholic priest. And he was the original Grenada historian. Apart from that, he wrote about birds and everything of Grenada. So when I was about 4 or 5 years, that was the image of Father Divas coming to Belvedere among the laborers. It's all documented in the first book. And when I became of age, meaning I'm about 16, 17, I used to go with him and Father Bernard to Mount St. Catherine. We have approached Fedo's camp, you name it, from every direction. Grand Roy. Okay, Concord. I don't finish yet. Boujeju. Do you know you can go to Fedo's camp from Boujeju? Do you know you can go to Fedo's camp from Megrin? When I use the word Megrin, I'm just trying to be cute. St. David's? Right? All point to Fedo's camp. You name it. I've approached Fedo's camp from every direction. So the book is dedicated to Father Davis. And my first article and the play, I told you the play in 65, and the first article, nobody was more proud than Father Davis. I remember when the article came out at Statewood, maybe I was a youngster, maybe 19, so I'm in Gov, maybe celebrating, or not celebrating the book, maybe with my friends, and Father Davis went all the way to Belvedere to congratulate me. And my aunt told him, no, I'm in Gov. So this was the sort of person, and he kept in touch. I saw in my diary, in that little calling diary, that July 1967, I'm in New York, and I have noted, received a letter today from Father Davis. And Father Bernard, who died a couple years back, he was also a climber. He came from Czechoslovakia. So the book is dedicated to Tel Fabido, who is right here, and the book is dedicated right. And the book is dedicated, as I said, to Father Davis. Now, we were speaking about the scholars, and this is why I want to make notes, a note of that. People always ask me, which was the first question, why do you write about Julien Fedon? But one of the problems in Caribbean history, across the Caribbean, we blame the Europeans and others for dictating our history, but we don't write our own history. For example, believe it or not, one of my great friends, he is from Alaska, a white man from Alaska. Okay? He's a retired judge. He's a friend of mine. We met a couple times. As a matter of fact, I have to send him some documents on a famous Grenadian right now he's writing about. And do you know what? When any famous Calypsonian die in Trinidad and Tobago and in Antigua like Swallow, guess who the Caribbean media is asking for information about the person who died from? That person, that friend of mine, that white guy, the retired judge in Alaska. So he makes his career of documenting Calypso. But we don't do it. And then we blame other people when they dictate our history. So back to the Julien Fedon. In the last 4 or 5 years, there is not only Caribbean persons have earned a PhD by writing on Julien Fedon. There is only 2 years ago or late last year in the peak of COVID, a woman from Ireland, she wrote a book on the Roman Catholic Church in Grenada during the time of Julien Fedon. Okay, this book just came out about 2 years ago, right? So obviously most of the book is about Julien Fedon and the time of the Roman Catholic Church. Another professor out of Boston University, thereabout, she wrote a book about the Carys of Boston. And she could have well said the Carys of Grenada. This family came to Grenada. The man came to Grenada before the American independence movement for U.S. independence started. So he arrived in Grenada, I think in the early 1760s. Then his wife, she left her 3-month-old baby in Boston to join her husband in Grenada. Of course, these were white folks, and guess what? They lived in what we call today Simon, but it was Simon Estate, S-I-M-O-N, but we say Simon. And then he owned a plantation in what we call today Union, around that time up there. Mount Pleasant Estate in this between St. Mark's and St. Patrick. They had 13 children. They had 13 children. 8 and 9 were born in Grenada. Well, this was the time, 17th, so some of them were obviously buried right here. And some of them, they went back obviously just before the Fedon's Rebellion started. And guess what? one of the great-granddaughters is the founders of one of the top Ivy League schools for women in the United States that we don't know about. It all started right here. It was the slave money, right, that started it. And so this woman write a book about the curries of Boston, but as I said in my review of the book a couple years back, she could as well call it the curries of Grenada. Then there is another professor out at Chicago, and I'm talking about white folks. I'm not being racist or any such thing. I'm just trying to, the reason I'm mentioning color is to tell you that while we ignore our history, other people are looking at it. So this professor out of Chicago, she wrote a book again about the Federalist Rebellion, and her conclusion, which I knew years ago and I agree with, it was not about how they tell us about this man did nothing, the governor did him nothing, and the Federalist Rebellion, he was fighting for the liberty of Grenada. Whether or not for France or that, I don't know. That's for another group of people to research. But the point here is this. The Federalist Rebellion was sold when England won Grenada in 1762. Because Professor Jacobs just mentioned Trinidad and Tobago. Now, the migration to Trinidad and Tobago did not start in the 20th century or the 19th century, as we are led to believe. And every day, up to last week, I was telling a Trinidadian that at a meeting in Brooklyn. It started when the British conquered Grenada in 1762 and officially became a British colony in 1763. So the Roman Catholics in Grenada were no longer allowed to practice their religion. So, but all the Trinidad was Spanish but Roman Catholic. So what the slave master did, they took the hundreds of slaves with them to go start a new life in Trinidad. This is why when you hear some people say that Calypso and Carnival started in Trinidad was brought from Grenada, there's a certain amount of validity to that. So that is the concept. People are researching Fedo, and right now as I speak, there is another professor from Australia. He when I released, this book was released in March, and one of the first persons to order this book, the first sale I think came from Australia, and I was on Australia. This man is writing a book right now on Julien Fedon, right? So you can understand why it is so essential that we do our own research. Now, this is the way I said goodbye to the scholarly community. I praise Dr. Beverly Steele. She has already bought 2 or 3 books. She couldn't be here because her husband is ill. I've always recognized Dr. Curtis Jacobs. There is a doctor, a professor out of Texas. He wrote Comparing the Slave Societies, Professor Cox. He bought 5 books immediately. As soon as the book came out, he bought 5 books. He's retired now from the University of Texas. He wrote for his PhD about 30 years ago, comparing the slave societies of St. Kitts and Grenada, and bulk of it is about the Federalist Rebellion. So I hope this is, and then what I'm trying to do now, the scholars, no negative about the scholars. Most scholars, they try to focus on the cause of the Federalist Rebellion and the effects of it. But the dramatic piece that will make into a movie, the drama, sometimes we bypass it. We even bypass the eyewitness writers, the people who like Dr. Hay, Reverend McMahon. Sometimes we take their book for granted. We don't even read it, the scholars. But there is a lot in those books that we would understand Julien Fedon. But remember I told you it started, and we now to the actual question, the redemption question about redemption. When you study it, the biggest crook in Grenada at that particular time was Governor Ninian Home. Okay, the biggest crook, you see, because this man robbed all. If you look at the deeds are in the registrar's office. how they connived, right? He and his friend Campbell, okay, to take away the lands of the French people. And as you know, Victoria was called Grand Pauvre. The land, this is where the poor people from France fed our father, right? And when you read it, you would understand the cause of it was about for liberty. That was what the professor in Chicago. It was about liberty. It's not that about Fedor wanted to rule Grenada and give it back to France. Maybe so, maybe not. That I'm not here to dispute. But you will find, and then after the rebellion ended, they found out that Fedor never even owned Beverly. He never knew that. The estate was mortgaged to a British company, right? For £3,000 to a British company. And the same Campbell and his brother and the governor, they come back and sold a mortgage estate, right? To a French person that they're abusing for £15,000 sterling. So it was only after what happened at the rebellion, when the word came that there is this big rebellion, and what we don't know, the Federalist Rebellion was world news by 18th century standard. So if you look at any 18th century publications in the United States, in the 13 colonies, you will see mention of the Federalist Rebellion started. If you look at the archives in France and so forth, it was, by today's standard, it was international news. And then, guess what? The owners of this big mortgage company in England was a big member of the British Parliament. So you hear now, they killed the governor, his friend. Then you hear, worst of all, it's somebody of color, it's a French person. And then you hear it's Belvedere that Fedor owned the estate. And said, Fedor couldn't own the estate, we own the estate. And what they found? The deed showing that it was mortgaged was deliberately and purposefully left in Grenada so it would not get to England. So you could see all the abuse that went on. So when the Federalist Rebellion started, it was really a fight for liberty. The Roman Catholic, most of what is today the Anglican Church property was part of the Roman Catholic Church property. But that's despite the fact. The final point I want to make on this is the excitement of the book. I try not to give you a scholarly book, and this is why this book is going to be selling for the next couple of years. Not necessarily in the Grenadian market, but around the world, because we are getting orders for it, you know. By December, I'm hoping to sell about 2,000 books to libraries in Canada, the United States, and England. These are libraries who bought the books. The Trinidad government bought 80 of the first Julien Fedon book. So that's to tell you that there is interest in the book. But the point that I was trying to make here now was about the battles, to make it exciting. We believe in Grenada that it was some people in Soubise, Marquis, L'Abbé, which was the original town of Grenville, and the Federalist Rebellion obviously broke out in Guave, and that was the end. The Federalist Rebellion was across Grenada. The only place that was not conquered was the city of the town St. George's. The entire parish of St. George was controlled by Fedor, the entire island. And as a matter of fact, the Montgranby, which made history with the young parliamentarian in the election, making history, they're coming from Montgranby, from St. John's. This was where they are caught. This is where the French surrendered. Not Fedor. Fedor never surrendered. It is the French who surrendered, and he never gave up. But in terms of the battles, there were constant battles. The battle right here, you know Battle Hill? Why do you think they call it Battle Hill? Because you know hundreds of people, slaves and everyone, French people, English people, they died. There were wars, Battle Hill. And then we have right here, Pilot Hill. Hundreds of people died at Pilot Hill. All the ammunition used to be up there up to 20 years ago, until people from abroad knew the value of that. They came and they take it to just a barren hill. This, if you read the story of Pilot Hill, you wouldn't believe it's right here. There were constant, it was whoever controlled Pilot Hill controlled Grenville Bay, right? And if you didn't control it, right? So there was a constant battle for Pilot Hill. And I just heard somebody mention telescope. It extended. And a young lady who's playing in the band, she told me she's from Paradise. And I told her, you know, Paradise is mentioned in the book. And she was alarmed. Because guess what? Paradise slaves participated. Slaves from Paradise on the federal side. And then the final point I would like to make, we hear about the Maroons in Jamaica. We all went to secondary school here, and we heard about the Maroons in Jamaica. The Maroons were all over, and there were hundreds of Maroons in Grenada. This is where the Maroons were. And without the Maroons, the Federalist Rebellion would not have lasted for 16 months. And this is why, on the cover of the book, this black guy here is not a slave. The man in the back of Julien Fedon is a Frenchman. Now, by the way, this was my conception. I know there is a bust of Fedon created, I think, in 1917 and thereabouts. It was a modern-day conceptualization of Fedon. Well, there were no pictures of Fedon, but this is Fedon's camp here in the background. But the guy here is what we call a Maroon, or to be politically correct. Right now, we can say he was a liberator. He was a self-immolated slave. Grenada had so many Maroons, and the biggest person, believe it or not, the biggest person who made the most money in Maroon capturing was a man named Louis Lagrenade. But even though we may ridicule Louis Lagrenade because he was the biggest bounty hunter, he made a fortune conquering slaves, right? But this was the times. I am not here to ridicule Louis Lagrenade. You know why? Louis Lagrenade never betrayed Fedon. People believe that. You see, you betray somebody if you were part of the team. He was never with the British. He was never with Fedon. Louis Lagrenade, instead of speaking French, spoke English. He changed from the Roman Catholic Church to the Anglican. In other words, everything British was Louis. He even asked to be a citizen of England, and they made him an honorary citizen, right? So Julien Fedon and them, they all knew that Lagrenade thinks British. So he was never part of the team. So he could not have betrayed Julien Fedon. As a matter of fact, the very few quotations we have about Julien Fedon is that when he heard that Louis Lagrenade was killed in the main battle on April 8, 1795, he said he cannot blame Lagrenade for go to the English because they have always treated him well. So Louis Lagrenade, as far as I'm concerned, it maybe could be a Grenadian hero in his own way because, you know, he fought on the British side. But he never betrayed Julien Fedon. And again, back to the battles as I summarized here. There were battles, when you read the battles, post-royal, those of us who are from the St. Andrews area, post-royal was the scene of many battles. And one of the famous battles in 1796, even the same British complimented Julien Fedon. So if you look at the generals and the folks who wrote, who were actually in battle, this is what I try. There's a lot of quotation in this book about them. They even praised Julien Fedon for what they did on that day in 1796. He lost. But at that time, they had about 8,000 soldiers who just arrived from Barbados. They hid the fleet in what we call Kikimjini in that area, hid the fleet. They had another fleet that came down from Guave, right? And then by land, they came through Lasages into what I just told you, the place down here, Post Royal. And this was one of the biggest battles. That battle extended for 2 days in Post Royal. It extended into Soubise, right? Marquis, Labé, Pilot Hill, Battle Hill, Telescope, paradise. All that was the sin of that battle in 1796. This is one of the reasons why Hollywood screenwriters right now, the book is in the hands of 2 Hollywood screenwriters who have an interest in the book, because what I try was not to, again, I do not want to decry the scholars who are here. I try to give the dramatic part of the revolution, where, for example, the mills. Dr. Williams was asking me about the mills the other day, and I was saying to her, the last mill of the governor and the prisoners was planting, because planting was the meal, it was the main dish, that was the food the slaves, everybody ate. And to tell you how the planting was vital is this. They planted the planting 9 months before the revolution, because it was well planned. And when the British realized that everybody was eating the plantain, not realized that the slaves, the revolutionaries, as well as the British, they needed plantains. So the British gave the order, and guess what? The slaves will go and destroy all the plantain crops. But they were supervised, obviously, by the British soldiers. So what I try to do in this book is just not to give you a boring piece about cause and effect and theory, but to give you live. In other words, you can go and do, in theater, create an entire scene of a battle. The battle in Guab, Guab was conquered, reconquered, conquered, reconquered, which is so much humorous. And then I will stop with that battle. That is just the final battle in Guab. The slave who came from Barbados, he was a slave, and he went and he told the British in Guab that Pharaoh is going to attack Guab and recapture Guab. And guess what happened? They took the slave, the British, and they imprisoned him. They felt that he come and gave them erroneous information. So, and then nothing happened at night. But the weather was bad. But it was a late, I wouldn't say a hurricane, a late summer storm, as they say in the Caribbean now. It came. And no way the British expected that anyone will attack Guab. Julien Ferro recaptured Guab that night without one shot being fired. The British then had to flee Guab, right? The doctor, Dr. Muir, he was the resident doctor in Guab. In trying to escape, he jumped because the sea in Guab was rough that night. And all the British had to dash to St. George. All night they walked back to St. George's. But Ferro captured it without one shot being fired. And this is the saga, the drama, the excitement I try to put in this book. So when you are reading this book, you are not really reading a textbook. You are really reading, it's not a novel. There's nothing about this. There's no fiction in this book. But yet, I have it into different sections, so it could be easily be read and hopefully enjoyable. Yeah.
Justice to try to say something after that. But I do want to, before I recognize Dr. Jacob, to ask His Excellency if you want to say unas palabras. Gracias, por favor. Because it's good to have Mr. Hall speaks about people all over the world, you know, in Australia and in Czechoslovakia and so on. Right here in our backyard from Venezuela.
Thank you, Sister Decima. Oh, yeah. Mi inglés no es, English no es very well. Pero bueno, primero que nada, hoy soy privilegiado. Porque bueno, acabo de conocer a Mr. Herman y tuve la oportunidad de escuchar al doctor Jacob Curtis, que también yo lo he estudiado.
And I had the opportunity to know Dr. Curtis Jacobs,
Que yo lo he estudiado a él.
that studied about Fedon Revolution.
Bueno, primero que nada, déjeme decirle en cuanto a Reduction Song, en la medida que estemos hablando de Fedón y la rebelión de Fedón, estamos redencionando Fedón. Hay redemption song, ¿no?
Yes. I would like to say, first of all, about redemption song. We are talking about redemption song, and we are actually living redemption song as it relates to Fedon.
Lo otro que hay que decir, a mí me llamó la atención porque tengo años investigando sobre Fedón.
It was brought to my attention because I have many years studying about Fedon.
Estuve en la montaña de Fedón.
I was on Fedon's camp.
Ajá. Y porque me llamó la atención porque en 1795, en mayo de 1795,
And it was brought to my attention because in May of 1795, sorry,
en Venezuela
in Venezuela,
también hubo una rebelión liderada por José Leonardo Chirino.
there was a rebellion done by Jose Leonardo Chivino.
El 10 de mayo de 1795.
The 10th of May of 1795, yes.
Y en Grenada fue el 3 de mayo de 1795.
And in Grenada, it was the 3rd of May of 1795.
Hoy día, gracias a esa rebelión, en Venezuela se conmemora el Día de la Afro-Venezolanidad.
And because of that, today in Venezuela, we commemorate the Afro movement in Venezuela.
No, Afro-Venezuelan Day.
Yes, Venezuelan African Day
Por esa rebelión de José Leonardo Chirino.
because of the revolution.
Y en cuanto a la rebelión, primero tenemos que decir
And according to the revolution, we have to say,
porque
first of all,
nos hemos acostumbrado a hablar de los esclavos negros y de los negros esclavos.
because we are accustomed talking about black slaves and slaves that are black.
Esa es la primera mentira,
That's the first lie.
porque ellos eran libres, eran hombres y mujeres y niños y jóvenes libres en África.
Because they were free. They were women and men free in Africa, children free in Africa,
Que fueron secuestrados
that were captured
y traídos en contra de su voluntad
and brought against their will
para ser vendidos
to be sold
y después convertidos y esclavizarlos.
and converted into slaves.
El otro elemento es
The other element is,
que ahí viene la redención.
here comes the redemption.
Nos quitaron la lengua.
They removed our tongues.
Ya no vas a hablar Kikongo, ya no vas a hablar Yoruba,
We are not
ya
going
no vas a
to,
hablar Chanti Afanti, ya no vas a hablar Efiefo, vas a hablar la lengua, vas a hablar inglés, vas a hablar español, vas a hablar portugués o vas a hablar francés.
we are not going to speak the languages of Africa, but now we are going to speak English, French, Dutch, etc.
Nos quitaron el nombre.
They removed our names.
Ya te vas a llamar José, Pedro, María.
We call you Joseph, Maria.
Nos quitaron nuestros orichas, nuestras deidades. Nos quitaron nuestras deidades, nuestros santos, por decirlo en católico.
They removed our gods, our saints.
Tú vas a adorar a estos santos católicos, apostólicos y romanos.
Now you are going to adore these saints of the Roman Catholic Church.
Pero no pudieron con el enquisi, con el espíritu.
But they could not do that to our spirit.
No pudieron esclavizaron el cuerpo, pero no la mente ni el espíritu.
They enslaved our bodies, but not our minds and our spirits.
Ahí está la redención.
That is the redemption.
Correcto. Nunca lo pudieron dominar.
They were never able to dominate us.
De ahí viene la rebelión.
And that's where the rebellion came in.
Y las rebeliones fueron actos.
And the rebellion were acts
de legítima defensa.
of legitimate defense.
Fue un acto de legítima defensa buscando de recuperar su libertad perdida.
Because they were looking to recuperate their freedom that were lost.
Esa es la verdad.
That is the truth.
Ahora, si yo hablo desde la perspectiva colonial,
And if I speak about from the perspective, colonial perspective,
voy a reproducir el discurso que siglo tras siglo nos han venido introyectando en nuestras mentes.
we are going to speak of the recurring century for century that continues to affect us.
Y le quitamos la responsabilidad a los esclavistas.
And we remove the responsibility
A los esclavistas.
of those who
A
enslaved
los
us,
imperios esclavistas.
of the imperialists,
Esclavistas.
of the enslaved, the imperialists who enslaved us.
England, España, Portugal, France,
England,
Holanda.
England, Portugal, France, Spain, France,
Entonces ellos siguen libres. por
and
el mundo,
they continue to be free
sin asumir sus responsabilidades.
without taking responsibility.
Esto para entender,
This
para
is
entender lo que somos.
this is to understand who we are,
Si yo no hablo, cualquiera cree que soy de Grenada.
and I don't speak because I am not from Grenada.
Sí, right? Entonces voy al barco.
And I go to the boat.
¿Cuál es la diferencia?
What's the difference?
Que el barco de mis ancestros
The boat of my ancestor
se paró en Venezuela,
was stopped in Venezuela,
pero un hermano lo pudieron haber mandado a Grenada,
but a brother of mine could have been sent to Grenada.
la mamá a Trinidad,
My mother to Trinidad,
porque el sistema esclavista no discriminó.
because the system of slave does not discriminate.
Separó a nuestras familias.
It separated our families.
Esa es la verdad.
That's the truth.
Y si nosotros no intentamos recuperar esa memoria histórica y esa memoria colectiva,
And if we are not encouraged to remember this, to remember the
memoria histórica y colectiva, histórica y
um,
memoria,
the history and the collective history,
seguimos reproduciendo y repitiendo la cosa.
we are going to
Con
continue.
esto termino, doctor Jekyll.
We are going to continue to repeat the same history.
A mí me gustó su trabajo, se lo voy a decir públicamente.
Dr. Jacobs, I love your book, and I would
La influencia africana, de la espiritualidad africana en la rebelión de Fedón.
the spirit, the African spirit in the rebellion of Fedon.
Yo leí los dos. El simbolismo, exactly. Yeah, exacto, el simbolismo.
Uh-huh.
Very nice. Yeah, very nice. Yeah, very nice. Like the Grenada Fedon. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry for me.
I just want to, I'm not speaking about Fedor now. Okay, the reason why this book was scheduled to be out here in 2021, but COVID came into play. And the reason why we were going to do it in Grenville, and I was going to have a big march, I was going to have the actual celebration where the Federalist Rebellion started on March 2nd, midnight March 2nd, 1795. The next day, we were going to do it in Guave, and then would have ended up in Marisha House. So the reason we are here is for symbolic reason. The Federalist Rebellion actually started in the parish of St. Andrews, and of course in St. John's, and it spread all over the parishes, in all the parishes. But the two home parishes for the Federalist Rebellion was Labé, it's right by Subi's Market, this is the original town of Grenville, and in Guave. Now, as a result of that, we have launched it now here in Grenville today at the Rainbow Inn. On Monday, it will be in Guave Library, and on Tuesday, it will be at Marisha House in St. George's. So I'm asking you if you would like to attend the Marisha House. If not, it's going to be a repeat of what we said today. Tell friends, and you are welcome, especially the young people. I keep saying you do not have to come to this event to purchase a book. You could always purchase the book later. The book will be on sale in Grenada for a long time to come. Most important, bring a young person so they could know our history and understand a little bit of our history. So again, I'm inviting you and I'm asking you to invite friends to meet us in Guave, 5 p.m. at the Guave Library on Monday, and then on Tuesday in St. George's. And finally, before I take the questions, Dr. Williams will pose some questions, I think, is this. This is also a very symbolic weekend in Grenada. Dr. Williams mentioned Dr. Kenrick Lewis. And again, I'm going to say to you, don't be surprised if one of these days you hear a Nobel laureate for chemistry is Dr. Kenrick Williams. Don't be surprised, so I'm warning you. So Dr. Kenrick Lewis sent me an email this morning reminding me, as if you don't think I knew, but reminding me to tell you of the significance of this weekend. It was on July 2nd and 3rd to the 4th, 1779, that the British conquered Grenada. It started in Petite Harbor, and they conquered what is now Hospital Hill, and Grenada surrendered to the French in 1779. But the victorious French fleet, they decided to remain in St. George's to enjoy the spoils of victory. And then unknown to them, at 4 a.m. in the morning, the British ships, the British battleships that were stationed off St. Lucia, decided to attack. And one of the biggest battles, because it was an extension of the American War of Independence. The American War of Independence, I'm going to be on PBS soon, discussing the Caribbean role in the American War of Independence. What the French did that was supporting the 13 colonies, they wanted to make the French fleet in the Caribbean stay to fight the British, while the revolutionaries in North America and the 13 colonies could do their physical war on land. So as a result, the Caribbean was a theater of battle during the American War of Independence, because the French fleet was able to destroy the British fleet. Actually, when the French fleet conquered Grenada in 1779 and the Battle of St. George's, there's a whole chapter about it in the book. You know what? Most of you may have heard about the attack of Savannah, Georgia. That's French fleet retuned, fixed the boats, and they went to participate in the Battle of Georgia that President Trump had made mention when he was ridiculing Haitians, and the Haitians reminded the former president of, it was the French fleet that went and helped defeat the British in Savannah, Georgia in 1779. But guess what? And then I will quit. Guess who may have been on board that boat? A youngster named Henry Christophe. He could have been about 12 years old. And Henry Christophe became like a sort of an adopted son of Toussaint Louverture. And there make no doubt about it. I see on Facebook Grenadians asking where he from, was he from. Listen, when you go to Haiti, if you go to Haiti, one of the first things you will see in Haiti, one of the founding fathers of Haiti, Henry Christophe, there's a statue there, and it tells you he was born in Grenada. And not only when King Henry first when he created his palace, guess what he named his palace? Sans Souci. So you see the amount of history we have in Grenada, and I do hope that present and future governments will see that our local history is a priority.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. An afternoon so very well spent. Professor Damien, I shudder to invite you to the podium. But I want to say that all of us have been enriched, and you must ask a question, make a comment before this session closes. Young people, Damien, don't be afraid. Question, comment? Ushan. Ushan, no.
It's the whole idea, the whole idea of the color, the color that played the color of people's skin that played such an important role with Fedon himself being a mulatto, and the mulattoes not quite, and again throughout history, and I'm sure that Dr. Jacobs can help me out on this too, the whole business of the mulattoes having an identity. I don't want to say an identity crisis, but a difficulty with their identity in terms of being neither white nor black. And there's somebody who wrote something about the unappropriated peoples, referring to the mulattoes. And I see hints of it in your book, Mr. Hall. I see hints of and when we talk about Grenada Island of conflict, we can talk about the conflict from way back then. Religious conflict, Anglicans versus Roman Catholics. The conflict, the class conflict, the color conflict, and so on. And what resonates with me a lot now is that as I look back at that, being here 15 years ago, I can see that the color divide is very critical. Is a critical part of what I call the cleavages that we see in Grenada today. And it's not peculiar to Grenada, it's there in St. Lucia. But I want to say, and this is just basically an impressionistic view, not backed by any hard research, but I want to say that the color divide here in Grenada is even deeper than St. Lucia. But I am seeing it in the book now in terms of the historical experiences and developments from way back when. So I want to thank you very much for that, and I'm certainly interested in this history. And it's one of the things I would want to do when I do my lectures at St. George's University in political science and sociology, because a lot of our Grenadian students don't know this and they are fascinated when they hear it. And we have to find a way, Mr. Hall. We must have a national conversation in Grenada on how we can ensure that the history of Grenada is given to its people in a particular way, that it is interesting, that is dynamic, and that can encourage them to want to do it. And I want to say that now with the digital situation where our young people are interested in social media and so on, it's a golden opportunity to leverage the social media that they are very, very good in. They are great at it. How can Mr. Hall, Dr. Jacob, and others leverage that opportunity to bridge the intergenerational gap and teach the history in such a way that social media makes it exciting? Thank you very much.
All right, interesting. Anybody? Last call. Dr. Jacobs. Sorry. Sorry, I promised Dr. Jacob he'll be half a minute and then we come to you. Yes.
I heard Herman talking about the Battle of Post Royal Hill.
Page 258.
And I said to myself, I sure Decima did not know
What?
that the day of the Battle of Post Royal Hill, which is March 26, 1796, it was March 26, 1982, that Morris Bishop wrote to Ronald Reagan asking to talk about Grenada and its airport. Right? And Ronald Reagan did what Thomas Jefferson did in 1791, when Maurice Bishop's great-great-great-grandfather, Louis La Grenade, wrote to George Washington and asked him, I want you to, and Thomas Jefferson said, don't answer him, okay? And how much 100 years later, Ronald Reagan doesn't answer Maurice Bishop, right?
Neither does Eric Williams.
Right? And
Yeah.
I, as a Trinidadian living in Grenada and been interested in Grenada's history since about 1982, it strikes me how, I'll have to say it, ignorant Grenadians are of their history. And I'll go back to you, Decima, again. This will be the People's Congress at Simoon. Remember that?
Of course.
Do you know that is where revolutionaries gathered at Simon Estate to march on Grenville or L'Abbé?
In the
On the 3rd of March?
1790s.
Yeah, good. And then to go back a little bit nearer, we have 2013, the 3rd of March 2013. Those of you might remember what that day is. That is the day that the government of Grenada was formally installed after the elections of 2013. Right?
So
that is the day, that's the day of Grenada's associated statehood, right? It is the day of the start of Fedon's rebellion. And in the speeches, nobody said a single word by way of remembrance or reference to those things. And it shows there is a kind of abysmal ignorance by Grenadians in the history of their own country. Things line up sometimes so neatly, and people don't seem to notice or they don't even seem to care.
I won't comment on our national ignorance. Charges of our national ignorance, particularly since I'm not sure how much more informed are Trinidadians about their own relations, so much so that they're claiming Sparrow. And I will ask our scholar and poet here, our community leader, to take to the microphone.
I can sit.
You can sit.
Good afternoon to everybody. I sat and I listened, and I said I must make a comment. First of all, I remembered in the time of the revolution in Grenada, Maurice Bishop always made a connection between the revolution and Fedon's rebellion.
Yes.
And I must say, as a child, what I didn't like about history was the dates. But when I didn't study it in Standard 4, and I came out of the first 10, I realized you can't go that way. So I had to get interested in the history. I tried not to think about what was done to the slaves, but you can't block it out, right? As I sit here, something interesting is happening. I heard the ambassador for Venezuela speak, and I wonder if it's my son that's speaking there. Because he graduated during the COVID years times, Texas, with a first degree honors pass in mechanical engineering. But that boy, that man now, has become an avid reader. What is he reading? The history of Grenada. Going way back. Coming forward now, he's into Africa. And the same points that my brother in front of me made about the Catholicism and the saints and the belief of the Africans, that's where he is now. And he said to me, Mommy, you made me read. I said, I'm grateful for that, but I don't know where you're going with that. Anyway, just read. He came down, I don't want to show off. One barrel was books only. Some he read, some he is reading and will read. And I tell you, he's reading, you know. So what I'm seeing here,
Jacob.
Although that's one person, he's a young person and he speaks to others. I think that will spread. Finally, I always said, I think we do not know our history. And that is sad, because a people who does not know its history, they are doomed to repeat it, right? And therefore, my conclusion is, this year is rich. This year is going somewhere, right? And it will continue. I thank you.
Is that your hand there, Jasmine? Is that your hand? No? Yes? No, not your hand. Any other hands? Well, this is fully exciting. So rich and so powerful and so teaching. The lessons are so many. I want to go back to one, which is who needs redemption? And I heard, I could be completely wrong, I thought I have heard today that Julien Fedon is the redemption son of Grenada. If we heard that with a full stop at the end, or with a question mark at the end, we certainly could connect Fedon to redemption. And let me be fully provocative and say, therefore, what about Deacon Mitchell? What about Deacon Mitchell? Redemption son, full stop, or redemption son, question mark? On that very pleasant note, I want to, that to Professor, that instead of the full stop. And I want to thank all of you for coming. It's really a mixture of very powerful presence here tonight. I want to thank the young musicians under the tutorship of their father, their overall collective father, Kenrick Harper, who himself hails from Fedon's community on the other side of Fedon's community. This is Fedon's country. This here, St. Andrew's Labé. I claim Labé in my own dissertation as Fedon's country, Gamay. That market vendor woman who said to Fedon, you cannot start the rebellion until I tell you to do, because she had her spies out, up and down, watching the British. And when she felt that the coast was clear and things were ready, am I right? See, I picked that up 20 or 30 years ago when I was writing my own dissertation. Gamay, one of the few women, she was a slave, she was a market woman, hardly mentioned in history. You had to go back and uncover her, right? And made a very powerful impact on when was the strategic time to start the rebellion. One of our locations, both in terms of the gender dynamics of the rebellion and the geographic importance of our areas and so on. So, Kenrick, you have, and your father here with you, Mr. Harper, it's your dad, Mr. Welsh. Thank you for your presence and all that you all have carried in your bosoms about Fedon from the other western side of the island. Thanks to all of the scholars who have studied Fedon, Dr. Jacob, Dr. Ambassador, my good friend Jorge, Damien, you will come into that, and all those, I hate to call us amateur historians, because you may not see us publish Dr. Jacobs, but Grenadians know stories. We carry the stories of Grenada in our families. And thanks to all of you, this is an opportunity now to enrich that story, to revive and revitalize that storytelling of our own history. We have started here in Grenville, and this will become a national and international conversation. We cannot say thank you enough for the writing of it and for the spreading of it. So let's give him a hearty round of applause. And to invite you all to please partake of the refreshments that's been waiting for you for 3 hours. I've never seen an audience on a Saturday afternoon spend 3 hours waiting to hear and to feel and to participate and to carry forward. Thank you.
I wouldn't be able to sleep tonight. If I did not, it would be an injustice. Julien Fedon did not do it by himself. You know who he did it with? Mary Rose Fedon, his wife, a very, very, very dedicated woman. She served coffee to one of the prisoners, Dr. Hay, the morning. When he sent the money, she returned the money in Belvedere. Because what? When Pharaoh's wife. Here is a man who owns an estate. Oh, no, that was before he owned the estate. But here was a property owner in the parish of St. Mark, and his wife was being accused as being a slave, and the British threatened to imprison her. She signed it. So if you go to the registrar's office, you cannot see those documents. They are very old and disintegrated. It takes care, very much care to look at it. His wife, so when we talk about women liberation, his wife was the co-signer of every deed, not only for the Belvedere property. The property is in Guab, opposite, right? Actually, the event in Guab on Monday could be in one of Pharaoh's property, because he had a piece of property just facing St. Pierre Street. The name hasn't changed from the Pharaoh time. But his wife was with him throughout, and she was with him. The British tried to say, how could a man have his wife in Monquaco? The women, the British was going to come through the valleys of Belvedere. So why would you have your family in the valley? So all the women and their children, they were up at Monquaco so that the British wouldn't kill them on April 8, 1795. So the women, they were the ones who cooked not only for the revolutionaries, but for also the prisoners. They served the plantain, they cook. In Pharaoh's camp, there is no water. It's mountains up there. There is water, but it's not drinkable. So they had to cook the food in Lower Belvedere, or what we call foyer now, and so forth, and bring up the food. And then we have a nation. The nation is called Grenada, but we know the nation consists of Carriacou and Pitimaknik. And what most people don't know, that Pharaoh's second in command was from Pitimaknik. And the slaves from Carriacou, they all came down and participated in the Pharaoh's rebellion. Thank you for coming, and see you hopefully in Guab and in St. George's.
And again, I want to thank Herman Hall and my team here at Rainbow Inn for putting together this evening, preparing and hosting and getting it all. It is thanks to the staff of Rainbow Inn. And thank you, Mr. Herman Hall. And again, sincere thanks to all of you. And this book is a treasure trove. I want to, in it you will find your revitalization intellectually, spiritually, emotionally. Please purchase it. It's at the back of the table, and it will be on sale here for as long as needed. $75 for the book. Buy it and send it as gifts to your young people who are graduating now, and so on. And you will also, we have put in a bookmark from the Grenada Education and Development Program. I must make a plug for that, which celebrates its 26th anniversary on the 16th of July. Curtis Jacob will tell me what's important about the 16th of July in history. And Grenada is given to promoting education. So I think in this new dispensation, where education will, more of the education cost will be assumed by the government, says the new Prime Minister, I think Grenada might easily return to one of the education things we used to do, which is a public policy discussion on history, on policy, and so on. So we want to tell you to keep your eyes peeled on what we could do, keep your prayers in our direction, and may God richly bless Fedons and Deacons Grenada. Thank you all. Who will serve? Eyes open.
All right, eyes front, all eyes front.